Okay, so I'm going to get rolling here, and then we're going to go for a walk, and we're going to end up at the end of the field. So I hope you brought your walking shoes. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Brian Beres. I'm a research agronomist here with Agriculture Canada at the Lethbridge Research and Development Center, and you are in the midst of our irrigated agronomy land base in Lethbridge. And just to give you some context of what we like to do on the agronomy side. Our job basically is to close as much as possible the genetic potential of the plots you just saw at Rob's stop there with the realized farmer yields that we're currently getting. And we're in the process of working on trying to establish really what that gap is, and then looking at a little bit more cohesive research even globally and trying to close that down. One thing we really like as part of our priority as a government research organization is the fit of winter wheat, and I'm sure Rob has sold you on that. We have our stakeholders here, Ducks Unlimited Canada, as well as the Alberta Wheat Commission, who are committed to it as well. And so my role is to kind of work on the production piece, that 50% that results in your yield potential, and then we've got Rob and the other breeding colleagues working on the genetic side of things. And so we tend to scale things up a little bit to try and get as much real world relevance as possible here. So for example, that no-till drill there is essentially the center wing out of a Conservapack air drill, which was bought by John Deere a few years ago. I think it's the 1860 now. They've done a few changes, but there's still some things that are the same. We also needed to try and find an in-between between the small little plot drills that we have on our breeding and adaptation type trials. So when we upgraded the openers on the Conservapack, we stole them and we used them on this guy here, and we just got this thing built and rolling this year. And it's a nice little go-between, especially when you're limited in both space and seed quantities. So we'll just walk down. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the experiments that we have here. So if you want to roll with me, we'll head this way. Yeah, walk this way. So you can tell me when we're getting to about like half an hour or so.
Ice cream time.
Yeah. Some of the plots that you're going to see here, we're going to talk a little bit about nitrogen and growth regulators primarily, but some of the plots that you'll see later on don't quite have the yield potential you might think for irrigation. That's because we have to cheat back the actual nitrogen rates that we're using in order to get the type of nitrogen response we're trying to get. But this one here is a little bit more real world. So this is Moats, which is a variety out of University of Saskatchewan, CDC. And the reason we did this one was twofold. We want to do a little bit more work with nitrogen, liquid nitrogen, UAN, but also we wanted to sort of test the hypothesis that both higher seeding rates in a UAN type management style are still the optimum way to go. There's some thoughts out there that maybe you can rely on tiller management and UAN applications as a strategy or as a compensation or alternative to high seeding rates, and we're pretty sure that's not the case. And so the one thing to keep in mind with winter wheat is that it does use more N than spring wheat, and so in this case we're pushing for or assuming that we're going to have a total of about 150 kilograms of N per hectare, which is about where winter wheat should be. And then the assumption there is that we're having at a minimum about 20 kilograms background, and then we're adding in the other 130 and looking at generally splits where we're putting a proportion of that around 30, upwards of around half at planting, and then the remainder applied in spring at around Feeks 4. And this is the lowest seeding rate. So one thing to keep in mind as we walk this way is just get a sense of the uniformity that you see at the low planting populations versus the higher planting populations, as well as the height. Because already, and we see this with winter wheat because it has a high tillering capacity, it's looking pretty good. You're only at 150 seeds per square meter in these three plots here. But because of that tillering capacity, that's sort of the explanatory variable there. You're not going to really change dramatically the number of heads per unit area as you increase seeding rates, but you're getting rid of tillers and replacing them with main stems, and that's what we want to have. 60+% of your yield potential comes from the main stem. There's no point having a bunch of tillers out there. We'll rely on tillering if we have a bit of a disaster in the field or some issue that leads to less than desirable plant stands. Then we want the tillering capacity to kick in. Otherwise, we want a high plant population, gets rid of the runts, and lets the real top dogs sing. So yeah, 150, 150 at varying split applications of UAN. And there are questions about, should I split or not and how much? And generally speaking, so far, the safest bet that gives you probably the highest consistency and yield stability is probably a split where you're putting a modest amount down at planting and then top dressing the balance. That said, though, that a lot of times isn't any significantly different than putting all your nitrogen down at planting. But over time and space, you probably get a little bit better stability and consistency. So there's not a real major penalty with if that's the operational reality in your world of putting it all down at planting either. But if in my world, if I would much as possible be trying to split, especially with UAN, which can be without a stabilizer, quite volatile and volatile and vulnerable to loss. So now we're at 300, same variety, but you can tell me what you're starting to see. So Blaine, what'd you see when we went from low to high seeding rates? Could be smaller heads. Shorter crop, definitely. More even maturity, you were going to say? Possibly. Yep. Yeah, less tillering too, right? But more main stems, shorter, more uniform, and you're going to harvest this one before the others. And are you going to enjoy greater yields than, say, the one you guys are standing beside, that the 300 density? Possibly not, but it's kind of hard to put a tangible around the competitive ability you get with this higher planting rate, the insurance you get if you are exposed to issues around winter survival, and the luxury of being able to start your harvest earlier, and the possibility of cutting back herbicides as well. So this is the one we like for sure. I don't know who was driving that Hyundai, but they drove all over my plots. You guys see that on the side there? Just kidding. Had to give one of our guys a little pep talk this morning about maybe slowing down the mower a little bit when he's rounding the corner. So anyway, this next study, as we up our yield potential, especially you seed growers and farmers know there's issues around the potential for lodging. So we're involved in PGR studies, plant growth regulator studies, in anywhere from winter wheat that I'm leading into a lot of the spring cereals and even crops like pulses. And so this one here, rather than focus on a whole lot of different chemistries of different PGRs, I chose to go with Trinexapac ethyl with this study. The reason for that is Syngenta was very keen at getting to market and getting registered a PGR specifically as a starting point of winter wheat. And so that had appeal to us as part of our winter wheat project. So rather than use a lot of chemistries, what I was interested in was studying it under a range of different genotypes. So anything from a short, and I don't think this, well, where's Rob? Do we know or don't know that it has the RHT gene or not? I think the jury's out on that. But anyway, it's a short variety. And so I wanted to see how PGR works on a short variety. I wanted to see how it works in moats, which is the variety you see over there, and it's down here a ways. And then something really tall, which is hard to find nowadays in wheat, obviously, because you guys like really short ones. But fall rye, we've got lots of tall ones, and that's Hazlet down there. So basically, we took the plant growth regulator at 2 different doses, 0.6x of the label rate, proposed label rate, or 1x, and then we did that either at a late kind of tillering, which is around that Zadox 31 is where you want to be thinking of putting this one on. It's a fairly flexible PGR that way, so that also had appeal to us. And then we were either applying it at that time or later on as into the reproductive phase at pre-boot, just to see how detrimental going too late is. Okay, and so starting with a control, you can tell me how apparent you see the difference is, and then at the end we'll talk about what the results are like. So kick your heels up and let's start moving. Yeah, 31. So for example, this has the full rate, but we've specifically intentionally gone too late technically. So you can decide if that was detrimental or not, had an effect or not. Or should we see any effect with a short variety? Okay, and then we start with motes at this plot. So that's nothing applied. And then you can see if you're noticing anything as we move along. Now you know why I wanted to look at this. So we got a little bit height difference here than the other genotypes, but are we making a huge difference with a PGR? Follow me and let's see. So these are all treated either half or full rates essentially at 2 different timings.
Jump in with a question while you're waiting for people to catch up. Recently, I had an Australian visitor who was interested in. He said that they actually mixed 2 different types of growth regulators together for a bigger effect.
Yeah.
Heard anything about that?
I haven't, and probably for 2 reasons. We got really excited about PGRs and what they might offer, and then we had the MRL issue, and so. The other issue we have, at least here, is some of them are very sensitive or can actually cause sensitivity in the crop if you're outside the application window. So the opportunity or idea with those 2 things in the back of our minds wasn't something that prompted us to start looking at mixes yet. Where we would go next with some of this work probably would be mixes with herbicides and trying to minimize the amount of times we're going to be in the field, because we can come up with all these different inputs, but going in a dozen times into that field probably isn't going to be the most provide you with the best business case for success either, nor sustainability wise. So no.
It was the Trinexapac and Cyclosol that they were putting together. He says that they work way better in combination.
Well, I can definitely see some of them being a lot more compatible, whereas others would be, a big issue. And
So how much do they cost, these PGRs per acre?
10 to 13 bucks. Great stuff.
so is that product, or is that making a phone call and having it done for you?
That's just product.
Yeah, so I think the next step here, which is a good segue to the results, is how are we going to incorporate this technology as a management issue against lodging in high production environments in the context of the economic returns. And so I was a bit reluctant to take this study on because I really wasn't so sure we were going to make a big difference. And so we took it on, and I told the guys, okay, this is the strategy we'll do, which I already explained, and let's try and push it and get this stuff to lodge as much as possible. So as Murphy's Law would kick in, after 2 years we've had no lodging. So then I thought, okay, there's no lodging, there's going to be no difference in yield. But after 2 years now, we've analyzed the data. with even with the shortest variety still in the analysis, all three systems, there was a significant response in grain yield. And I would have thought, well, with Flourish in there, that's going to definitely screw up the results, because as you walk by the first variety there, Flourish, which is already short, I'm sure you would agree you didn't see massive results there. The fact is, though, pulling it out actually weakened the yield results. So it's having a positive benefit on Flourish as well. We're reducing height. Preliminary stem analysis, we're not widening the stem at all, really. There's a slight trend towards that, but it's not significant. We might, on the inside of it, be adding some pith to the culm or something, because with the plot behind you there, or maybe it was this one, actually, one of these ones, we had significantly more biomass, which is kind of counterintuitive since when we dropped the height on it. That might be a bit of a ghost that we're chasing, but we'll see after the third year how that results. But the bottom line is the PGR, even in the absence of lodging, is providing a significantly higher yield. And
You got a ballpark magnitude on that, or?
It's modest. I wouldn't say it's. I mean, I've heard reports on manipulator and spring wheat providing 20%. We're nowhere near that on winter wheat. But the other thing with these, though, is that we haven't had significant lodging, so that might also add to the yield differential if we had that. I don't know. The big thing, though, is going to be, reconciling that with the $15 per acre, or whatever that was you mentioned.
If that the concept is about reducing the height, like add some herbicides like velocity in wheat, if you applied them a little bit late, like with stem elongation, they tend to reduce the height.
Mm-hmm.
So that could be one thing to compare. If you apply the velocity type of herbicide late and short height.
Maybe it's short because it was herbicide injury.
So was it a yield injury? That I don't know.
Yeah, we'll see. But it's interesting nonetheless. So we've got a lot of measurements and analysis yet to do, but that was kind of interesting. Was there a question back there?
Oh no, I was just wondering if you could go a 10% yield decrease.
Yeah, I don't think not quite. But the other comment that a farmer had, going from taller to shorter, was he was speeding up by a mile per hour. Now, how do you quantify that economic benefit when it's an operational benefit? So, those are some of the things we'll have to try and be cognizant of and work in to the conversation when we.
That's because of lodging difference, though?
No, that's just because of the speed. He was able to go faster once he dropped the height on it a bit.
With a different product. Same
Yeah.
thing, no lodging, but we saw kind of like a 5% significant yield increase.
Yeah.
But timing was the biggest interaction.
Well, and that's what's bouncing around here too, is the appropriate time versus that later time, and it sort of speaks to the flexibility of this, because sometimes that 0.6x is actually with pre-boot is doing not a bad job. So that'll be the other question on the herbicide, is the dose, or sorry, on the regulator side, the dose, and then that whole interaction with herbicides. Okay, so back to fertility, and you can tell I work at the same place as Rob Greff, so here's Flourish again we're using. That was a bit of a strategy there. We had a new variety coming out that had a lot of potential, and we wanted to right away put an agronomic package around it, and that's sort of the strategy we've sort of had for a number of years. Previous to this study, we did quite a comprehensive nitrogen management study, but it was just with granular. The feedback we had a little bit of UAN in that. The feedback from stakeholders is they wanted to see more research on the UAN side. The other reality around nitrogen dynamics is you've got the enhanced efficiency fertilizers and the stabilizers coming to market or being tested and soon to be introduced to the market. And then you've got some interesting reports coming out that Dr. Regas Karamanis has been very diligent, and I would argue very fair and unbiased about the fact that now we've been in no-till for so long. There's some things are evolving that maybe we didn't quite anticipate, and one of the things might be around the losses around nitrogen. And in the old days, we thought that applying and incorporating that nitrogen right away was the best way to go. Some work has now been done, not necessarily in a no-till situation, but I think some of that could, as a philosophy, as a theory, be transferred over to a no-till system, is that there's actually greater volatilization in shallow banded than just broadcasting some products on. In this case, I think they're comparing just granular urea. So when we start thinking about the role of an enhanced efficiency fertilizer, and that was used in that study as well, I mean, just putting on an enhanced efficiency fertilizer broadcast was a far safer bet than uncoated urea incorporated. So the economics and the business case and the role of these is probably a little bit different as our no-till and as our farming systems evolve. So the only thing left is to put it into a system to determine, the benefits agronomically, and then the economic analysis that always follows that type of a study. So in this particular one, on the UAN side, there's a couple of stabilizers that you could put in, and that was definitely something we knew we needed to look at with UAN, particularly at planting. That Conservapack over there has a liquid kit on it, and we can put liquid down at planting. The previous study, though, showed us quite dramatically that without a stabilizer, you lost a large percentage of that. And UAN was always significantly lower with respect to providing grain yield than any of the other forms or timing scenarios that we had. So it's definitely a good time to start looking at products and forms that'll stabilize UAN. In this case, Instinct. This is a Dow AgroSciences product that they're looking to bring to market, and they so that's a form that's a nitrification inhibitor. So that would actually have a pretty good role with the UAN system. So you can see for yourself whether or not you're seeing big differences. These holes, by the way, aren't badger holes. This is where our guys have gone in and done some destructive counts. And then the comparison, of course, is always going to be to either an uncoated granular 4600 or the just plain old UAN, and we've got those plots as well. So UAN with Agritane Plus, so that's our Agritane plus the DCD, or the nitrification inhibitor. So there's a form available for both granular and liquid, and so Agritane's been around forever. The one that combines both the urease inhibitor with the nitrification inhibitor, not quite as old, and so it'll be really interesting to see with the granular forms as well as with the one that goes with UAN, to see how well it performs. I'll talk about.
Where's your check?
Down here.
Oh, down far.
Yeah. Yeah. Just regular Agritane. And then here's UAN, and so this will be, when we look at liquid, of course, this will be one of the checks actually. So you have two checks in a lot of nitrogen studies, one without the stabilizer, which quite honestly it's looking pretty good and did last year, of course. So, and then of course a check without any fertilizer at all. In the same study, we're also comparing it to the granular 4600 because I think we need to tie those results together. And then there's always a question around where and when is a polymer coated urea the best fit. So we've done a lot of work and published a lot of work around the benefits of ESN or polymer coated urea in a seed place situation. The results have been very striking and compelling and really highlight the strength of an enhanced efficiency fertilizer around a seed safety issue. So guys using the old flexicoil systems or single shooting. If you were one of the ones that like to put all or almost all your fertilizer at planting but had concerns around placing it too close to your seed, ESN is your solution, because you can, with most nitrogen studies, particularly on dry land, we know that once we get to about 90 kilograms of N per hectare, with spring wheat, for example, we're meeting both yield and protein requirements, because the assumption is we've got some background N there. And in the old days, if you're using just an uncoated nitrogen product like urea, if you went up to 30, you would probably beyond that start causing injury. But we showed quite clearly you could go to 90. And even Ross McKenzie, with some of his work back when he was with Alberta Agriculture, was showing even beyond that to 120, depending on the situation. But definitely, it's been repeated enough and demonstrated enough, you could go 3 times the recommended safe rate with ESN. And so the question is there any utility with ESN outside of a seed run or seed place situation? And so we had another study, that was back when Dr. George Clayton, now the famous photographer, was still a scientist. And we collaborated on a study with Lacombe where we were putting and looking at ESN side banded at planting. The idea there was, well, would a slower release, sort of sustain itself long enough through the growth duration of winter wheat to provide not just a yield benefit but a protein benefit? And how does that compare to 100% ESN side banded versus a split of 50-50, which is this plot here as well? And the fact is there was no yield difference between 100% ESN side banded or this blend of 50-50. But they both provided better yield than uncoated urea. So don't spend your money with the 100% ESN side banding, but there might be a case to be made going with a 50-50 blend over straight uncoated urea. Somebody asked about the control. There's our control, looking pretty bad, which is what we want to see, because we know we're not carrying much in the background profile of this soil. So this makes me happy, believe it or not. I even told them to leave the thistles in. Okay, so the last experiment just looks at enhanced efficiency fertilizers now back to a granular situation. And so again, we're starting off with Instinct here, the nitrification inhibitor. And basically, I believe we're putting either all of it at planting or we're splitting it and going with a ratio of 30% of our N at planting, and then 70% we either put on in late fall or in spring when we probably should be doing it. The late fall is a strategy we started putting into some of these experiments because as you move further east, some of the grower feedback we had with some of the producer commissions was they can't get on in the spring. A split application is either a non-op or they're going to try it late in the fall. And late in the fall with just uncoated urea is a disaster. The losses far outweigh any of the benefits. The one striking result, though, that we observed with our previous study was that Super U, which is not just a nitrification inhibitor, but it's the urease inhibitor too. So it's basically agrotane with a nitrification inhibitor. It was the only form we had in that study that protected yield even if you applied that split late in the fall. So that's a pretty good tool then for growers that still want to experiment with that. The question is, it'll be interesting to see what Instinct will do in late fall, given that it only has the nitrification and denitrification inhibitor part of it, not the urease part. So that's this will be an interesting one to look at here.
75% is the nitrogen applied late?
Yeah, that's the balance of 70%. Thanks for bringing that up, actually, because I forgot to mention that. So with these studies here, and generally speaking as a management tool, when we don't have nitrogen as a factor either, We've gone with the Western Ag Innovations PRS system. And basically it's a real easy and quick method of what I find gives us a pretty good estimate of background soil and other nutrients for that matter. And so we use that system. They're doing all the lab work for us to give us the results. And then because it's a nitrogen study, whatever they tell us, we only go 80% of that as well. So in this case, that represents 80% of the recommendation that they would have provided. So, and that amount will vary from site to site.
70% was broadcasted?
Yep. Okay, so this is the Super U that I was talking about, and this is sort of, you can see if you've seen a difference or if you observe a difference. This is all of it at planting, and then successive plots here when we start splitting it off. And this is that late fall treatment I was talking about. It looked good every year in that study. It's been looking good in this study as well. So.
Is that a ground freeze up then, Brian?
Yeah. I think with us we're going mid to late November here. So just some final comments around ESN, because we are using it and we're broadcasting it in this study, and the reason for that is not to tell you that that's a recommended practice. Because of the treatment structure, everything has to get applied in the same fashion. So we kind of discourage the use of ESN for top dressing for two reasons. One, you're paying for a polymer coated urea, but the chances of you getting a good response when you top dress, probably the only way you can get that consistently is by running it pretty aggressively through your air boom, such that as it hits those deflector plates, it fractures the polymer coating. Otherwise, what tends to happen is it could get stranded up, especially long-term no-till fields in the thatch layer. And if you don't get timely water around that application, you could find that months later still sitting there. And so it's really not something, given the added cost, we would recommend over just it as a split or a top dress. Yes, they do it in the Corn Belt, and yes, it's been designed for the Corn Belt. So the two issues around ESN outside seed safety for us, not really for top dressing. In the other case we tried to make the Agrium it'd be nice if it released a little bit faster actually, especially in sideband situations, because it does tend to release slower than we would like, because they've designed it for the Corn Belt. It releases exactly the way they want it for that's their market. We're sort of a secondary market in reality for ESN. But seed safety wise, unbelievable product and tool for managing seed safety. And then of course this is going to be sort of one of our benchmark checks here as well, taking all your urea, banding it at fall and seeing how that compares to the different treatments. And another lousy looking control, which is what we want to see. Look at that, I'm relatively on time too. So, any last minute questions? I already answered the question about ice cream. Yep.
Join me in thanking Brian.